The sun had barely risen over the Tiber River when Marcus Flavius Severus, a junior scribe in the office of the Praefectus Urbi, arrived at his desk in the tabularium. It was March 15th, 71 AD, and the marble floors still held the chill of the previous night. At 23 years old, Marcus had served in this administrative role for 2 years, meticulously documenting the legal proceedings, executions, and public spectacles that Rome orchestrated with the precision of military campaigns. His hands trembled slightly as he unrolled a new papyrus scroll. Today's assignment was different. He'd been ordered to compile a comprehensive report on the public punishment of captured rebels from the recent Jewish revolt, a task that would require him to witness firsthand what he had only previously recorded in clinical, detached language. "Severus!" The voice of Gaius Antonius, his superior, echoed through the stone corridors. "The procession begins at the 3rd hour. You'll accompany me to document everything for the Imperial Archives. Bring extra ink." Marcus nodded, gathering his materials. He had grown up in Rome, in a modest insula near the Subura district, the son of a wool merchant who had saved enough to purchase his education. He understood that Rome's dominance over 50 million people across 3 continents wasn't maintained merely through the strength of its legions. It was the calculated deployment of fear, the transformation of punishment into public theatre, that truly subjugated populations. The streets were already filling with crowds as Marcus and Gaius made their way toward the Forum Romanum. Vendors sold roasted chickpeas and watered wine. Children darted between the legs of adults, excited by the promise of spectacle. The morning air carried the scent of incense from nearby temples, mixing with the less pleasant odors of the densely packed city, sewage, sweat, animals, and smoke from countless cooking fires. "You've never witnessed a triumph procession, have you?" Gaius asked, his weathered face impassive. At 52, Gaius had served under 3 emperors and had documented horrors that Marcus could only imagine. "No, sir. Only the routine executions at the Gemonian stairs," Gaius grunted. "Those are mere practicalities. What you'll see today is statecraft. Emperor Vespasian understands something that weaker rulers forget. Power isn't just about defeating your enemies. It's about making their defeat unforgettable. It's about ensuring that every provincial governor, every tribal chieftain, every potential rebel across the empire hears what happened here and thinks twice." They positioned themselves on a raised platform near the Temple of Saturn, where Marcus would have an unobstructed view. The March sun climbed higher, warming the stones of the Forum. The crowd swelled to thousands, senators in their togas with the purple stripe, equestrians, freedmen, slaves, merchants, prostitutes, beggars. Everyone came to witness Rome's power made manifest. The procession began with the blare of trumpets. First came the senators, walking in solemn dignity. Then the spoils of war, golden menorahs, sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, carts piled with silver and precious artifacts. The crowd roared its approval. These treasures would fill Rome's coffers, fund new aqueducts, public baths, and the massive amphitheatre that Vespasian was constructing. A monument that would transform entertainment and terror into architecture itself. But it was what came next that silenced even the most boisterous spectators: the prisoners. Marcus forced himself to keep writing as nearly 2,000 Jewish captives shuffled past in chains. Men, women, some barely more than children. Their faces were gaunt, hollow-eyed from months of captivity and the long journey from Judea. They had fought Rome with desperate courage, believing their God would deliver them. Now they walked through the heart of the empire that had crushed them, displayed like exotic animals. "Note the variety," Gaius said quietly. "Vespasian wants every social class represented. That one there," he pointed to a man with the bearing of a scholar, "was likely a priest. And those with the military bearing were zealot fighters. The young ones will be sold as slaves. The older ones, especially the leaders, have a different fate awaiting." Among the prisoners, Marcus noticed a woman, perhaps 30 years old, carrying an infant. Her dark hair was matted, her robe torn and stained, but she held her child with a fierce protectiveness that was visible even from a distance. Unlike many of the other captives who stumbled in exhaustion or terror, she walked with her head raised, her eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the jeering crowd. "Who is she?" Marcus asked. Gaius consulted a wax tablet. "Deborah bat Elijah, a Christian, according to the interrogation records. They're a sect that split from the main Jewish religion. They worship an executed criminal as if he were a god. She was captured near Jericho, hiding in caves with a small group. Refused to sacrifice to the emperor's genius, even under torture. The child is hers, a daughter about 8 months old." Marcus watched as Deborah stumbled slightly, and a Roman soldier roughly shoved her forward. She nearly dropped the baby, but recovered, clutching the child tighter. The infant began to cry, a thin, desperate wail that somehow cut through the noise of the crowd. "What will happen to them?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "The child will be taken and raised as a slave in a Roman household. The mother—" Gaius paused. "She's been selected for the arena games next month. Vespasian is inaugurating the new amphitheater with 100 days of games. They need victims. Christians make good entertainment. They refuse to fight back, refuse to renounce their God, even as the beasts tear them apart. The crowd finds it fascinating." The procession continued. More prisoners, more spoils, more displays of Rome's inexorable power. Finally came the captured Jewish commander Simon Bar Giora, a man who had held Jerusalem against Rome's legions for months. He was tall, still muscular despite his captivity, with the bearing of a warrior. But his hands were chained, a wooden yoke fastened around his neck, and Roman soldiers prodded him forward with spears. The crowd erupted in shouts and jeers. Rotten vegetables flew through the air. A woman spat at him. Simon kept his eyes forward, his face a mask of stoic dignity, even as he was paraded as the ultimate symbol of Rome's victory. "By nightfall, he'll be dead," Gaius said matter-of-factly. "Strangled in the Tullianum prison, then his body thrown down the Gemonian stairs. It's tradition. The triumph cannot conclude until the enemy commander is executed. Rome doesn't just defeat its enemies, it erases them." As the procession passed and began its route up to the Capitoline Hill, Marcus looked down at his notes. His hand had been steady as he wrote, documenting everything with the clinical precision expected of a Roman official. But inside, something had shifted. He had seen poverty before, had witnessed routine executions of criminals. This was different. This was punishment as performance art, suffering as state policy, degradation as propaganda. That evening, as Marcus walked home through the darkening streets, he couldn't shake the image of Deborah and her child. Somewhere in the city, in some holding cell beneath the new amphitheater, she was probably trying to nurse her baby, knowing that within weeks they would be separated forever, knowing that her faith would cost her everything. When he reached his small apartment, Marcus lit an oil lamp and sat at his personal writing desk. Against every instinct of self-preservation, he began to write a second account, not the official record for the archives, but something else. A testament, a witness to what Rome truly was beneath its marble facades and soaring rhetoric. He wrote about Deborah's eyes, about Simon's dignity in chains, about the 6,000 crucified slaves lining the Via Appia after Spartacus's rebellion, a corridor of agony stretching 130 miles, bodies left to rot for months as a warning to any who might dream of freedom. Rome didn't just punish. It traumatized, it terrorized, it transformed human suffering into infrastructure, making brutality so routine, so spectacular, that it became normalized. And people like him, educated, civilized, thoughtful people, documented it all with steady hands and measured prose. Marcus blew out the lamp as midnight approached. In a few weeks, he would be required to attend the amphitheater games, required to document how Deborah died, whether she recanted at the end, whether the crowd found her suffering sufficiently entertaining. He wondered if he would still be able to sleep at night after that. Or if, like Rome itself, he would simply grow numb to horror until it became indistinguishable from entertainment. The Amphitheatrum Flavium, the structure that would later be known as the Colosseum, rose against the Roman sky like a promise of glory and a threat of annihilation. Marcus stood in its shadow on a warm April morning in 71 AD, watching as workers completed the final preparations for the inaugural games. The massive structure could hold 50,000 spectators, its 4 stories of arches and columns, a monument to Roman engineering and imperial ambition. Vespasian had commissioned the amphitheater on the site of Nero's hated Golden House, transforming the former emperor's private pleasure palace into a gift to the Roman people. It was brilliant propaganda, a demonstration that the new Flavian dynasty served the public, not itself. That the plunder from Judea would fund entertainment for the masses, not the decadence of a tyrant. But Marcus knew the other purpose. The amphitheater would be a factory of fear, where Rome's enemies would be consumed by beasts, butchered by gladiators, or forced to kill each other for the amusement of crowds, where death would become theater and terror would be packaged as entertainment. Impressive, isn't it? A voice beside him made Marcus turn. It was Lucius Caelius, a fellow scribe he'd known since their school days. Lucius had been assigned to document the organizational logistics of the games, scheduling, procurement of animals, selection of condemned prisoners. "It's magnificent," Marcus replied carefully, "a testament to Roman power." Lucius laughed. "Always the diplomat, Severus. Come, I'll show you something that will feature prominently in your reports." They descended into the Hypogeum, the vast underground complex beneath the arena floor. The air grew cooler and carried the smell of wild animals, human waste, and fear. Torches flickered along stone corridors. The distant roar of caged beasts echoed through the passages. Lucius led Marcus through a maze of cells, storage areas, and mechanical lifting systems. 28 lifts, Lucius explained, gesturing to the elaborate pulley system. They can raise animals, scenery, even condemned prisoners directly onto the arena floor. Imagine, you're watching what appears to be a peaceful forest scene, and suddenly a trap door opens and a leopard emerges. The crowd loves surprises. They passed cells holding lions from Africa, bears from Germania, bulls from Hispania. The animals paced restlessly, sensing something terrible approaching. Further along were smaller cells containing the human condemned, the damnati. We have 312 scheduled for execution during the 100 days of games, Lucius said, consulting a wax tablet. Murderers, arsonists, deserters, bandits, and of course the special cases, the Christians and Jewish rebels. Where are they kept? Marcus asked. Separate section this way. They turned down a narrower corridor. The cells here were smaller, more crowded. Marcus saw perhaps 40 people, men, women, a few children, in various states of despair. Some prayed quietly, others sat in stunned silence. A few wept, and there, in a corner cell, was Deborah. She sat with her back against the stone wall, her baby clutched to her chest. The child was thinner than Marcus remembered, its cries weaker. Deborah herself looked gaunt, her face hollowed by hunger and anguish, but her eyes, those same eyes that had remained defiant during the triumph procession, still burned with something Marcus couldn't quite name. Not hope, exactly. Perhaps faith. Perhaps simple human stubbornness in the face of annihilation. That one, Lucius said, following Marcus's gaze. Deborah Bat Elijah, scheduled for the games in 3 weeks. She's been offered clemency multiple times. All she has to do is sacrifice a pinch of incense to the emperor's genius, acknowledge the divine authority of Rome. She refuses. And the child? Will be removed the day before her execution, sold to a household in the Esquiline district. A decent family, actually. The baby will be raised as a household slave, but treated reasonably well. Better fate than dying with her mother. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Can I speak with her? Lucius raised an eyebrow. Officially, no, but I'll turn my back for a moment. He walked a few paces away, suddenly very interested in inspecting a torch bracket. Marcus approached the cell bars. Deborah looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment, I saw you spoke, she said finally, her Latin accented but clear. During the procession you were writing everything down. I'm a scribe. It's my duty to record our humiliation, our destruction. Her voice wasn't accusatory, merely stating a fact. Yes, Marcus admitted, seeing no point in deflection. The baby whimpered, and Deborah gently rocked her. Her name is Abigail. It means, my father's joy. Though she'll never know her father, he was killed when the Romans took Jericho. I'm sorry. Are you? Deborah studied him carefully. Or are you just uncomfortable with the role you play in our suffering? The question struck Marcus like a physical blow. He had no answer. They'll take her from me soon, Deborah continued, her voice cracking slightly. And then they'll send me into that arena to die for the entertainment of strangers, because I won't bow to your emperor. Because I believe in something your empire can't tolerate. The idea that there's a power greater than Rome, a love stronger than its swords. You could save yourself, Marcus said quietly. One small gesture. Burn the incense. You could even pray to your own God afterward. Rome doesn't care what you believe privately, only that you show public respect. Deborah smiled sadly. You don't understand. It's not about the gesture. It's about the truth. Your empire demands that we pretend it's divine, that its power is absolute and eternal, but empires fall. Rome will fall. And the truth I believe in will outlive all of this marble and blood. That's a beautiful thought, Marcus said, but it won't save you. It won't save your daughter. No, Deborah agreed, it won't. But perhaps someone someday will read about what happened here, about how Rome transformed cruelty into entertainment, how it made degradation into infrastructure. And they'll remember that some people refused, that we chose truth over survival. Before Marcus could respond, Lucius called out, Severus, we need to move on. The animal handlers want to discuss the scheduling. Marcus stepped back from the cell. I'll document your story, he said quietly. Not just the official record, the truth of it. Then you'll risk becoming a victim yourself, Deborah replied. Rome doesn't forgive witnesses who tell the wrong story. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the amphitheater's official viewing section, his stylus poised over a fresh papyrus. The inauguration games had been spectacular. Vespasian had spared no expense. There had been gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, elaborate stage productions depicting famous mythological scenes. The crowd of 50,000 had cheered themselves hoarse. Now came the executions of the condemned, the damnati ad bestias. Criminals who would be torn apart by wild animals as a demonstration of Rome's justice and power. The arena floor had been decorated to resemble a forest clearing. Trees had been brought in, along with rocks and vegetation. Music played. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. Then the trapdoors opened. 5 people emerged onto the sand, blinking in the sudden sunlight. 3 men, 2 women, all condemned for refusing to sacrifice to the emperor. All Christians. Deborah was among them. Marcus's hand tightened on his stylus as he watched her scan the crowd. She looked so small on the vast arena floor, her torn robe fluttering in the breeze. The roar of 50,000 voices washed over her, jeers, taunts, calls for blood. Another trapdoor opened. 2 leopards bounded onto the sand, their spotted coats gleaming. The crowd erupted in excitement. What happened next would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. The leopards attacked quickly. One of the men was dragged down immediately, his screams lost in the noise of the crowd. Another tried to run and was pounced upon. Blood stained the sand dark. Deborah didn't run. She stood in the center of the arena, her hands raised, and began to pray. Her voice was too quiet to hear over the chaos, but Marcus could see her lips moving. The second leopard turned toward her, crouched low, preparing to spring. Then something unexpected happened. A Roman soldier, one of the guards responsible for ensuring the condemned didn't try to fight back, stepped forward. He drew his gladius and extended it toward Deborah, handle first. The crowd's roar changed tone. This was irregular, unscripted. Marcus learned later what had transpired. The soldier, whose name was Gaius Livius, had been assigned to guard the Christian prisoners for the past 3 weeks. He'd heard Deborah pray, heard her sing to her daughter, watched as she shared her meager food rations with other prisoners who were weaker, and something in him had broken. He couldn't save her, but he could offer her a choice the arena rarely granted, the choice of how she would die. Deborah looked at the sword, then at the leopard, then at the 50,000 faces watching her degradation. Marcus saw her make a decision. She took the sword. The crowd fell silent, confused. What would she do? Would she fight the beast? Would she try to kill herself? Would she attack the soldier? Deborah knelt on the sand. She placed the point of the gladius against her own throat, and then, in a voice that somehow carried across the arena in that moment of silence, she spoke, "My God, receive my spirit, and forgive them, for they know not what they do." She leaned forward onto the blade. The crowd's reaction was complex, a mixture of awe, horror, confusion, and angry frustration at being denied the expected spectacle. This wasn't supposed to happen. The condemned were supposed to be passive victims, not active participants in their own deaths. The soldier who had given her the sword was immediately arrested. He would be executed himself the following week for dereliction of duty. But Deborah had achieved something remarkable in her final moments. She had refused to play the role Rome had assigned her. She had transformed her public execution from a display of imperial power into something else entirely, a testament to human dignity in the face of absolute power. Marcus wrote down every detail in the official record. But that night, alone in his apartment, he wrote something else. He described not just what happened, but what it meant. How Rome's machinery of terror sometimes produced unexpected results. How victims could become witnesses. How the empire's attempt to crush dignity sometimes revealed the very thing it sought to destroy. He hid this second account carefully, sealed in a clay jar, buried beneath a loose stone in his floor. He didn't know if anyone would ever read it. But he knew it needed to exist, a counter-narrative to Rome's official history, a reminder that power, no matter how overwhelming, could never completely extinguish the human spirit. Somewhere in a household on the Esquiline Hill, a baby girl named Abigail cried for a mother who would never return. She would grow up as a slave, never knowing her true name or heritage, never knowing that her mother had defied an empire in her final moments. But Marcus knew, and he had written it down, and perhaps that mattered more than either of them could understand in that moment. Six years earlier, in 46 BC, a different kind of terror had played out in Rome's underground prison known as the Tullianum. Marcus had been too young to witness it directly, but as part of his scribe training, he had been required to study the documented accounts. Now, in 71 AD, as he continued his research into Rome's systematic use of public punishment, he returned to those records with new eyes. The story of Vercingetorix haunted the imperial archives. Vercingetorix had been the king of the Arverni tribe, a Gallic chieftain who had united multiple tribes in rebellion against Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul. For months in 52 BC, he had fought brilliantly, employing scorched earth tactics and guerrilla warfare that had brought Caesar's legions to the brink of disaster. At the Battle of Gergovia, Vercingetorix had defeated Caesar decisively, one of the few commanders ever to do so. But at Alesia, Caesar had turned the tables. After a desperate siege, Vercingetorix had surrendered himself to save his people from starvation. According to the accounts Marcus read, the Gallic king had ridden out alone, wearing his finest armor, and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet. Caesar had him chained and shipped to Rome. For 6 years, Vercingetorix was kept in the Tullianum, a small circular pit carved into the rock beneath the Capitoline Hill. No windows, no natural light. Just darkness, cold, and the slow erosion of the human spirit. Marcus obtained special permission to visit the Tullianum for his research. A guard named Titus Metellus, who had served there for 20 years, agreed to show him around and share what he knew. "It's not a prison in any conventional sense," Titus explained as they descended the stone steps. "It's a waiting room for death. Most prisoners spend only a day or two here before execution. But special cases, high-value captives like kings or enemy commanders, they're kept longer, much longer." The upper chamber of the Tullianum was cramped and dark, lit only by a single torch. But it was the lower chamber, accessed only through a hole in the floor, that represented the true horror. 12 feet deep, Titus said, gesturing to the opening. In the old days, prisoners were simply thrown down and left to die of thirst or starvation. Later, we developed more sophisticated approaches. Still killed them, but on our schedule. Vercingetorix was down there for 6 years, Marcus asked, trying to imagine such an existence. "Yes, Caesar wanted him for his triumph. You couldn't have a Gallic triumph without the Gallic king, but Caesar was busy consolidating power, fighting civil wars, dealing with Cleopatra. The triumph kept getting postponed. So Vercingetorix waited in the dark. Titus led Marcus to a storage room where old records were kept. He produced a series of wooden tablets covered in wax, reports from the guards who had supervised Vercingetorix's imprisonment. Marcus read them in chronological order, watching as the king's spirit was systematically dismantled. First year, the Gaul remains defiant, refuses to speak, maintains physical exercises as far as space permits, health declining due to lack of sunlight, but spirit unbroken. Second year, the prisoner has begun talking to himself, sometimes in his own language, sometimes in Latin. He asks guards about the weather, about seasons, appears confused about passage of time. Third year, physical deterioration severe, skin disease from the damp, but the worst is the mental collapse. He weeps frequently, begs to be executed, says he would rather die than continue living in darkness. Fourth year. The Gaul has stopped speaking, barely eats. We are concerned he may die before Caesar returns for the triumph. Increased rations and medical attention provided to preserve his life. Fifth year. Some improvement. Prisoner has accepted his fate, no longer resists, completely docile. Sixth year. Caesar has returned. The triumph is scheduled. The Gaul will be presented to the people, then executed as tradition requires. What was he like? Marcus asked, when they finally brought him out. Titus's weathered face grew somber. I was there. I was young then, just starting my service. They had to carry him out. He could barely walk after so long in that pit. His skin was pale as marble, eyes damaged from the darkness. He squinted and wept at the sunlight like it was torture. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they'd done to his mind. This man who had commanded armies, who had defeated Caesar in open battle, they'd reduced him to something barely human. He shuffled along in his chains during the triumph, and you could see it in his face. The confusion. The terror. He didn't even seem to understand where he was or what was happening. Marcus felt sick. And the execution? They strangled him during Caesar's triumph feast, traditional method for defeated enemy commanders. But I heard, and this is just rumor, understand, that Vercingetorix didn't struggle, didn't fight. He just closed his eyes like he was falling asleep. After 6 years in the dark, death must have seemed like mercy. Marcus thanked Titus and left the Tullianum. He emerged into bright Roman sunlight and found himself blinking and squinting just as Vercingetorix must have done 25 years earlier. The simple sensation of warmth on his face felt precious in a way he'd never appreciated before. That evening, Marcus added Vercingetorix's story to his private archive, but he also researched something else, the propaganda value of the king's treatment. What he discovered was chilling in its calculated cruelty. Caesar hadn't kept Vercingetorix alive for 6 years simply because he was busy. That was part of it, certainly. But there was another purpose. Caesar wanted every tribal chieftain, every potential rebel leader across Rome's expanding territories to know what awaited them if they resisted. Not quick death in battle, not honorable execution, but years of psychological torture, followed by public humiliation, and then death during a feast while Rome's elite drank and laughed. Your suffering as background entertainment to their celebration. It was terror as policy, punishment as propaganda. The message was clear. "Resist Rome, and we will not only kill you, we will break you first, so thoroughly that your own people won't recognize what we parade before them." Marcus found records of similar treatments. Jugurtha, the Numidian king, also kept in the Tullianum for years before being displayed and executed. Countless tribal leaders, rebel commanders, and resistance fighters subjected to the same systematic destruction of identity and dignity. Rome didn't just conquer. It taught lessons. It created examples. It turned human beings into cautionary tales. And the worst part, it worked. Marcus found correspondence from Gallic tribal leaders written after Vercingetorix's triumph and execution. Their tone had changed dramatically. Where before there had been defiance and pride, now there was compliance and fear. The psychological impact of seeing their greatest hero reduced to a shambling wreck, publicly humiliated and then casually murdered, had achieved what military victories alone could not. It had broken their spirit. Marcus sat in his apartment that night, surrounded by documents that detailed Rome's mastery of psychological warfare. He thought about Deborah in her cell, preparing to die rather than submit. He thought about Vercingetorix in his pit, losing his mind in the darkness. He thought about the thousands of unnamed prisoners who had suffered similar fates. And he wondered, what did it say about Rome that its greatest strength wasn't its legions or its engineering or its laws, but its willingness to inflict calculated suffering? That it had industrialized cruelty, turning human degradation into infrastructure and public entertainment. He picked up his stylus and began to write in his secret archive. Rome tells itself that it brings civilization, law, order, and peace to the world. But the truth is darker. We bring submission through terror. We maintain peace through the memory of unimaginable suffering. We are not builders of civilization, but engineers of trauma. And we document it all proudly, as if creating a monument to cruelty is something to celebrate rather than mourn. He paused, then added one more line. Future generations will judge us for this, and they will not be kind. Marcus sealed the document and returned it to its hiding place. Outside his window, Rome continued its evening business. Merchants closing their shops, families gathering for dinner, prostitutes beginning their nightly rounds. Life continued normally, built on foundations of systematic terror that most Romans never questioned or even consciously acknowledged. But Marcus knew now. He saw it clearly. And he could never unsee it. The morning was unseasonably warm for early spring, as Marcus travelled south from Rome along the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads. It was now 71 AD, 42 years after the events he was researching, but the history still stained the stones beneath his feet. He was making this journey because his secret archive felt incomplete. He had documented Deborah's courage, Vercingetorix's systematic destruction, and countless other individual stories. But he needed to understand the largest single act of public terror in Roman history, the crucifixion of 6,000 slaves along this very road. The Third Servile War, Spartacus's rebellion, had ended in 71 BC. The surviving rebels, captured after their final defeat, had been crucified along the entire length of the Via Appia from Rome to Capua. 130 miles. 6,000 crosses. 6,000 men dying slowly over days, even weeks, their agony visible to every traveller, merchant and soldier who used Rome's most important southern road. Marcus had brought copies of the official reports with him, but he also wanted to talk to people who remembered. Not the event itself, that was too long ago, but its aftermath. The stories passed down through families, the collective memory of what Rome had done. His first stop was a small farm about 15 miles south of Rome. The owner, an elderly freedman named Quintus Horatius, had agreed to speak with him. Quintus was 78 years old, but his mind was sharp, and his grandfather had been a young man who witnessed the crucifixions. "My grandfather never spoke of it willingly," Quintus said as they sat in his modest courtyard, sharing watered wine. "But sometimes, in his old age, the memories would surface, especially during storms. He said the screaming during storms was the worst." "The screaming?" Marcus asked. "The crucified men could take days to die, sometimes more than a week. They hung there along the road, thousands of them, crying out for water, for mercy, for death. My grandfather said you could hear it constantly, a chorus of agony stretching as far as sound could carry. At night it was worse. The darkness amplified the sounds, made it seem like the whole world was screaming." Quintus refilled their cups, his hands trembling slightly. But what haunted him most wasn't the sound. It was the smell. 6,000 bodies dying and then rotting in the sun for months. The crosses weren't removed. Crassus wanted them to stay up as a warning, so they hung there through spring and into summer. The stench became part of the landscape. You couldn't travel to Capua without breathing in the smell of death. Marcus took careful notes. "Did your grandfather ever express sympathy for the crucified men?" Quintus laughed bitterly. "Sympathy? No. He was Roman. He believed Spartacus's rebellion threatened the entire social order. Every slave owner in Italy had been terrified. What if their own slaves rose up? So when Crassus crucified 6,000 rebels, most Romans felt relief, not sympathy. The message was clear. This is what happens when you challenge Rome. This is what happens when you forget your place. But, Marcus sensed there was more. But, Quintus paused, choosing his words carefully. "My grandfather also said it changed something in Rome. After the crucifixions, there was a hardness that hadn't been there before. A callousness. We'd proven we could do anything, inflict any suffering, and call it justice. And once you've done something like that, once you've normalized that level of cruelty, it becomes easier the next time, and the time after that." Marcus continued his journey south, stopping at several more locations. He spoke with a wine merchant in Forum Appii whose great-aunt had been a child during the crucifixions. She remembered being unable to sleep, hearing the moans of dying men carried on the night wind. He talked with a retired legionnaire in Tres Tabernae who had served under a commander who had participated in the crucifixions. The commander had boasted about it, claiming he'd personally nailed more than 50 rebels to crosses. But the most affecting interview came in Capua itself, near where Spartacus's rebellion had begun at the gladiatorial school. An old woman named Livia, a former slave who had purchased her freedom decades earlier, agreed to meet Marcus in a small tavern near the amphitheater. She was 81 years old, her face deeply lined, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes were bright and fierce. "You want to know about the crucifixions," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "I'm documenting Rome's use of public punishment." "Punishment," Livia interrupted. "Is that what you call it? What happened on that road wasn't punishment. It was extermination. It was Rome sending a message to every slave in the empire. You are not human. You are property. And if you forget that, we will make you wish you'd never been born." Marcus felt the sting of her words, but didn't look away. "Tell me what you remember." Livia took a long drink of wine. "I was a child when Spartacus rebelled. My mother was a house slave, same as me. We used to hear stories about him, how he'd escaped, how he was building an army, how he was defeating Roman legions. And we hoped, gods, how we hoped. We thought maybe, just maybe, things could change. She fell silent for a moment, lost in memory. Then came the defeat and the crucifixions. They brought groups of captured rebels through Capua on their way north. We watched them march past, men who had fought for freedom, now in chains. Some were defiant, most were just broken, terrified. The Romans made us watch the crucifixions. All the slaves in Capua, thousands of us, were required to line the roads as they hammered men to crosses. They wanted us to see, to understand, to never forget. What was it like? Marcus asked quietly. Livia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Crucifixion is designed to maximize suffering. The victim doesn't die quickly. They hang there, supported by nails through their wrists and feet. To breathe, they have to push up on the nails in their feet. Eventually, exhaustion makes this impossible, and they suffocate. But it takes hours, sometimes days. I watched a young man, couldn't have been more than 20, crucified not far from where we're sitting now. He cried for his mother, called her name over and over. No one came, no one could help. We all just stood there, watching him die by inches, knowing that could be us if we ever stepped out of line. She wiped her eyes roughly. That's what Rome does best. It doesn't just punish individuals, it punishes entire populations. It creates trauma so deep, so pervasive, that it becomes part of how you see the world. 40 years later, I still hear that young man calling for his mother when I close my eyes at night. Marcus spent 3 more days traveling along the Via Appia, marking locations where crucifixions had been particularly dense, noting geographical features that would have amplified the psychological impact. Near Tres Tabernae, the road ran through a narrow valley where the sound would have echoed endlessly. Near Aricia, it passed through a residential area where wealthy Romans had villas. They had complained about the smell affecting their property values. He found documentation of everything. Supply requisitions for nails and timber, duty rosters for the legionnaires assigned to guard the crosses and prevent anyone from offering water or mercy to the dying, cost accountings that listed the crucifixions as a line item between road maintenance and aqueduct repair. Rome had transformed mass execution into logistics, suffering into spreadsheets, horror into bureaucracy. On his final night before returning to Rome, Marcus stayed at a small inn along the Via Appia. He sat outside under the stars, looking at the road stretching into darkness in both directions. Somewhere along this road 40 years ago, 6,000 men had died screaming. Their bodies had hung here for months, visible to every traveller, a declaration of Rome's absolute power and utter ruthlessness. And it had worked. The message had been received. For decades afterward, slave rebellions had been virtually non-existent. The memory of those crosses, that suffering, had accomplished what legions alone could not. It had broken the spirit of an entire enslaved population. Marcus thought about Spartacus himself, who had died in battle before the crucifixions. Historians debated whether that was fortune or tragedy. At least he had escaped the fate of his followers, the calculated, prolonged public destruction that Rome specialized in. He pulled out his writing materials and added to his secret archive. The Via Appia crucifixions represent Rome's philosophy of power in its purest form. This wasn't justice. The rebellion was already crushed, the military threat eliminated. This was pedagogy. Rome was teaching a lesson to millions of slaves across the empire. This is what happens when you resist. This is what we're capable of. This is what we're willing to do. And the lesson was learned. But at what cost? Rome believes it created stability through those crosses. But I wonder if what we really created was a wound in the collective soul of humanity. A demonstration that civilization and cruelty are not opposites, but can be merged, systematized, and executed with the efficiency of road construction. We crucified 6,000 men and documented it proudly. We turned murder into infrastructure. And we sleep soundly in our beds, never questioning whether the peace we enjoy is worth the price others paid for it, in screaming agony along a road that will bear their ghosts forever. Marcus sealed the document and prepared for his return to Rome. He had one more story to document, perhaps the most important one of all. Not another historical atrocity, but the question of what happened to people like him, who witnessed these horrors and tried to record the truth beneath the propaganda. The answer, he suspected, wouldn't be comforting. Marcus returned to Rome in late April of 71 AD to find the city preparing for the climax of Vespasian's triumph games. The 100 days of spectacle were entering their final month, and the emperor had saved the most elaborate productions for last. More executions, more gladiatorial combats, more exotic animals torn apart or tearing apart humans. Entertainment built on suffering, celebrated as culture. But Marcus had changed. The weeks spent documenting Rome's systematic use of terror had transformed something fundamental in how he saw the city. He could no longer walk through the Forum without imagining Simon Bar Giura's final humiliation, could no longer pass the Tullianum without thinking of Vercingetorix broken in the darkness, could no longer travel the Via Appia without hearing 6,000 voices screaming. He continued his official duties, producing the detailed reports required by his position. But his secret archive had grown substantial, dozens of tablets and scrolls, documenting not just what Rome did, but what it meant, the human cost beneath the marble triumph. He should have been more careful. It was Lucius Caelius, his old school friend, who first expressed concern. They met for wine at a tavern in the Subura one evening, and Lucius studied Marcus with worried eyes. "You've been different since the games started," Lucius said. Distant, troubled. Some of the senior administrators have noticed. Marcus felt a chill, despite the warm evening. "I'm performing my duties." "Your official duties, yes. But there are rumors, Marcus, that you've been asking unusual questions, interviewing people about old punishments, traveling to research sites without proper authorization, writing reports that don't appear in the official archives." "I'm being thorough." "No." Lucius leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're being dangerous. To yourself, and potentially to others. Rome doesn't appreciate scribes who develop their own interpretations of history. Your job is to document what happens, not to question why or whether it should happen." Marcus met his friend's eyes. "And if what we're documenting is monstrous, if Rome's greatness is built on calculated cruelty, do we just record it and pretend that's normal?" Lucius looked genuinely frightened now. "Yes, that's exactly what we do. Because the alternative is to become victims ourselves. Do you think you're the first person to notice the blood under the marble, the suffering beneath the triumph? Rome has existed for 800 years, precisely because it's ruthless with people who threaten the narrative." "I'm not threatening anything, I'm just writing the truth." "The truth is whatever serves Rome's interests," Lucius interrupted. That's the actual truth, the one that keeps you alive. Please, Marcus, as your friend, stop whatever you're doing.